Hey, welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to introduce a project that I want to invite you to help me build at the AI and Data Hackathon that's coming up on November 3rd. Okay, the idea of this project is I would like to write a VS Code extension that makes it trivial for data scientists or machine learning engineers to spin up and down remote workstations on any cloud. So that would be AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or even any on-prem compute like a Raspberry Pi or a laptop or a gaming PC. And you can use that remote workstation to easily train and track models, machine learning models, with best practices using VS Code and Jupyter Lab. And you can do all that without needing to learn Kubernetes. So the point of that caveat is that it's going to be very simple to use this, at least as far as orchestrating resources goes. This is going to be an open source contribution to a tool called ClearML that I think can be used by a lot of people. I'll give you some context about what ClearML is. ClearML is one of the components of ClearML is a UI. And as you can see, this UI has a lot of visualizations on it, and there's some data right here that's too small to read. Basically, this is a tool that helps data scientists author code to train machine learning models and give you everything you need to deploy them with best practices. Although the deployment feature of ClearML is still emerging. So basically, ClearML is an open source tool. It's open source under the SSPL license, meaning you can self-host it and you can self-host it for yourself and commercially, but you can't make a business out of offering ClearML to other people. Making a platform that offers ClearML as a SaaS offering is a right that's reserved exclusively for Allegro AI, which is the ClearML company. Okay, ClearML is a modern alternative to MLflow. If you haven't heard of MLflow, that's okay. It basically is MLflow with a lot more features and polish. So it starts to approach some of the nicer closed source MLOps tools that do some of the same things. So one of the things that it does is it is an experiment tracker and it is a model registry. So basically, if you train lots of models or even just a few models, you can log visualizations about how the models performed and make it easily to find the trained model weights that correspond with a particular experiment. It's also an orchestrator, so you can write DAGs or pipelines using it, kind of like an Airflow or a Metaflow or a Dagster or a Prefect. It sort of falls into that space. I would say as a production orchestrator, it's not something you would want to use under the same load that you use Airflow or Metaflow. But for R&D purposes, it's very convenient that it has this pipeline feature. Okay, but the feature that's most relevant to this project is that you can use it to provision remote workstations on-prem and in the cloud. And in my opinion, after surveying several tools that do this, I actually think that ClearML is currently the most powerful tool for hosting remote workstations. And part of that is that it has amazing features, and another part of that is its design philosophies. So one of the design philosophies is that it's very simple. You can actually run your own ClearML control plane with a single Docker Compose file on a single machine, whether that's on-prem or in the cloud. And that's pretty cool. This deployment of a Docker Compose running on a single node is actually production ready. It's also simple enough with a low enough learning curve that one person could operate and host ClearML without having it consume their entire life, which is often the case when you self-host tools, especially if those tools require you to use Kubernetes, which ClearML does not, which is, in my opinion, amazing. ClearML is also modular, so it has all these features, but you don't have to use all of them. You can actually use any subset of these features that you like, and ClearML plays really nicely with pretty much all the other tools in the MLOps space, both closed and open source. So if you already have something that does orchestration or experiment tracking, you can totally use those tools still, and ClearML will integrate with them. And so if all you want ClearML for is to provision remote workstations, that would be a great use case. But in my opinion, ClearML is a much nicer experiment tracker and model registry than MLflow is, or at least than the open source version of MLflow. Okay, ClearML has a CLI tool associated with it called ClearML Session, and you can use ClearML Session to start up remote workstations. I will explain more about how this works in a bit, but suffice it to say that you can see here that there's a lot of different arguments or settings that you can pass to the ClearML Session CLI tool that help you configure the perfect remote workstation for whatever you're trying to do. And one of the things you might notice about a tool that has so many configuration options is that it's a bit complex. It has kind of a learning curve, and it took me a few days to successfully get my first ClearML session running. Part of that was the learning curve of ClearML itself, and part of it was understanding how to use the CLI tool and some networking issues that I ran into. So the reason I bring this up is I think ClearML Session is a fantastic tool, but the onboarding experience is somewhat high friction, which in my mind would deter people from using it. So my point here is that while you can absolutely use the ClearML Session CLI to start up remote workstations, the onboarding experience to ClearML is a bit high friction. And so you have to overcome a decent amount of learning curve to be able to start using it effectively. Okay, this is how ClearML Session works. So if you are a data scientist or machine learning engineer, or just basically somebody with a laptop that has the ClearML Session CLI installed on it, you can run the ClearML Session CLI, which communicates to a ClearML server. And you can host this server yourself using the Docker Compose that I talked about, or you can use the SaaS hosted version that's managed by the ClearML, the company. And they have some cheap community plans on that, and even a free plan as well that has a pretty decent feature set. So basically there are a lot of options for getting yourself a ClearML server. The ClearML server, you can actually provide it with AWS credentials to an AWS account, and you can give it permission to create EC2 instances. And so you can enable ClearML to actually be able to auto scale EC2 instances and create them for you on demand whenever you ask for a remote workstation, which is really cool. So basically, if you ask for a remote workstation with the ClearML CLI tool, you could configure ClearML to create an EC2 instance for you, install Docker on that, start up a Docker container with VS Code running inside of it, and an SSH server. And then from your laptop, you could SSH connect into that ClearML session. The ClearML session being the Docker container with VS Code and SSH running inside of it. And then when you terminate that session, also using the CLI tool or using the ClearML UI, the instance that was being used by the session, ClearML will actually automatically reap, which is great because it saves you money. Alternatively, you could not use AWS, and you could actually just do the remote workstation on whatever on-prem machine that you have. The way that these sessions work is you install a long-running process called the ClearML agent on either an EC2 instance or on an on-prem machine. And in the case of auto-scaled EC2 instances, ClearML actually takes care of installing that for you. But basically, this agent is sitting there running forever, and it's pulling the ClearML server, and whenever it discovers that you've asked for a workstation, if that instance deems that it meets whatever compute criteria you specified, like having 5 CPUs and 4 gigabytes of RAM, then the ClearML agent will start up a Docker container with the VS Code server running inside of it, and that becomes your session. This polling architecture is actually really nice because it makes networking very simple. The only thing that has to be publicly accessible, an on-prem machine doesn't have to be accessible to the public internet to be used as a remote workstation. Your laptop does have to somehow be on the same network as the ClearML session that you connect to, but the ClearML server and the on-prem machine or the AWS instance do not have to be on the same network. Or better said, the ClearML server doesn't have to be able to reach whatever machine the ClearML session is running on. It's only the reverse direction. So that's actually really nice. Okay, so this is the flow for ClearML sessions. This is how ClearML sessions works. I think it would be a lot easier to do this process with a VS Code extension that acts as a graphical user interface over the ClearML session CLI tool. So instead of interacting with the CLI tool directly, you'd have a graphical user interface to start and stop and connect to these sessions. So this is pretty cool. ClearML currently in their UI does not support this functionality where you can, from a graphical interface, start up ClearML sessions. You actually have to use the CLI tool, which is fine. You can get the CLI tool to work. And you can, from the ClearML UI, list and see metadata about existing workstations. So that actually is quite nice. But you can't, and you also can terminate ClearML sessions as well. So what is difficult still with the ClearML session CLI is creating ClearML sessions and connecting to them. A VS Code extension can actually make this a lot easier. So here's my vision for that. What I'm imagining is that we have some kind of ClearML extension here on the sidebar, which opens up a menu. And in that menu, there is a refresh button. And if you click this refresh button, I imagine that this causes VS Code to invoke the ClearML session CLI to list all of the existing sessions and show metadata about the sessions that exist. So you can see like what Docker image the session's running with, or what its compute resources are, or what queue it's on, which is a ClearML concept that you don't have to understand for this discussion. And I would love for there to just be a button that you can click that takes care of everything you need to find the machine that this ClearML session is running on, establish an SSH connection to that machine, and open up a VS Code window on your laptop that connects to that ClearML session. I think that would be a really cool experience. Also, we could have a trash can button that can terminate the session and save you money if you're using the AWS Autoscale feature. And this globe icon right here, I imagine that opening up your browser, taking you to the ClearML UI, showing you this ClearML session in the ClearML UI. And finally, there's this little plus button, which I imagine would open up some kind of form that you could fill out and basically pass inputs to the ClearML session CLI tool. And one day we could potentially extend this too, and you could have presets that allow you to spin up ClearML sessions with settings that you like. Okay, I think this is actually going to be very doable. It turns out that VS Code extensions are pretty easy to author. The process is very well documented, and there are a lot of resources online. And if it is any comfort, and if this is helpful at all, a lot of junior people have authored VS Code extensions. So this is definitely something that is very within reach. Also, some of the hardest parts of this problem are already solved for us. So in my mind, when I was thinking about this, one of the hardest problems would be establishing that SSH connection and opening up a new VS Code window once you have a ClearML session that you want to connect to. And it turns out that there's an extension by Microsoft called Remote SSH that takes care of that for you. Extensions can expose commands. So this Remote SSH extension exposes a command called Remote SSH connect to host. And this connect to host command can take arguments. And so you could pass in to this command the IP address of the machine the ClearML session is running on, and you could also pass the port that the ClearML session's SSHD server is listening on. So as long as we can get the IP address and the port of the ClearML session, we can just invoke this remote SSH command to establish the connection, which would be awesome. Okay, so how would we discover the IP address and port of a ClearML session? Well, we could do that with the ClearML session CLI tool by running a CLI command, which basically requests metadata about an existing ClearML session. So how would we do that? Well, we would need VS Code to be able to invoke the ClearML session CLI tool. The ClearML session CLI tool is written in Python, and it turns out there are a lot of existing VS Code extensions that install and invoke Python tools. And one of them is Black, which is also by Microsoft, and it turns out that this extension is very well written and very readable. So I hope you could see that a lot of the big pieces here have resources that make them very achievable. So yeah, if you want to join, I'm hoping we can build this in a single night, and I will come to the hackathon with some boilerplate code, like a scaffolded out VS Code extension, and some learnings that we can start with so that we can hit the ground running. If you want to join my group, it would be awesome to have you. I'm going to spend a couple more minutes here showing you exactly what the tasks would be so that if you're interested, you can see concretely what you might be working on. So the first aspect of this project is authoring the VS Code extension itself. VS Code extensions are all written in TypeScript, which if you're a Python developer, that might make you sad. But actually, there's a big advantage to having VS Code written in TypeScript, and that is that VS Code can natively run in the browser. And that's only possible right now because VS Code is essentially written in JavaScript. Actually, TypeScript is, of all the programming languages, one of the closest to Python in Python syntax. So if you even watch a brief video covering TypeScript, you can get the syntax down, and then with the help of ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot, you can be productive very quickly. So I wouldn't see this as a barrier, even if it does seem daunting to work with a programming language that you're not familiar with. Okay, so we should start by making a Hello World VS Code extension. We can do that by following the tutorials online, and that can just help you get familiar with the anatomy of a VS Code extension. Then we will need to take that Hello World extension and add a sidebar menu to it that doesn't actually do anything, but we need to know how to make a sidebar. And then we'll add buttons and list items to the sidebar that don't actually do anything. So I'm sure we can find tutorials about how to lay out a menu. And then we'll wire up those buttons to functions that do stuff. So for example, the refresh button could call a function that eventually will invoke the ClearML session CLI tool, which will fetch data about the list items in the menu. Okay, we need to learn how to make a wizard with forms in VS Code. So basically a form with inputs where the user can be asked questions, which will become values that are supplied to the ClearML session CLI tool to create new sessions. We'll need to be able to invoke the Python ClearML session CLI tool from TypeScript, including being able to receive and parse the output from that CLI so that we can display that metadata that comes out of the CLI tool in the menu. We need to be able to distribute this VS Code extension, so we'll have to learn how to build and publish it. And I would really like this process to be encapsulated in CI/CD, which if you haven't set up that before, that's a great project to have in your portfolio. So even if all you did was set up CI/CD for our VS Code extension, that would be in my opinion, a great project to talk about, like in an interview or something. If we have time, I'd love to add some unit tests to our VS Code function. And the last thing is that VS Code integrates with Python and has a pretty good story for using a very specific virtual environment. I think we should integrate with that functionality so that we can select a virtual environment or just a Python environment and install the ClearML session CLI in that environment. Hopefully automatically, maybe with a button or something. Okay, so that's the UI side of VS Code and TypeScript. There's another aspect of this which is about ClearML. In order to get this working, we're going to need a ClearML instance that we can play with. So I propose that we start by signing up for the free SaaS hosted version of ClearML. So that'll be our ClearML server. And then we could install the ClearML agent on some other machine, like on a laptop, or maybe we could get a DigitalOcean droplet and install it there, or an AWS EC2 instance or Lightsail, any Linux virtual machine. We just need one that we can install the ClearML agent on so that we have something to install our sessions onto. And so once we have that going, we'll need to validate that we've set this up properly by actually creating a ClearML session. That process will give us a development instance of ClearML that we can use to start learning how to create sessions with the CLI and read and describe the metadata about the sessions and describe the queues, which is a ClearML concept that we can talk about later, so that these will become the actions that the buttons in our menus do. And like I said earlier, we need to find a way to receive the output or parse the output from the CLI commands that we invoke here so that we can display that metadata in the menus nicely. So there's some research that needs to go into that. Okay, here are 3 sub-projects that we can do completely independently of the VS Code extension. We could do them not at all. We could do them in parallel. If you're more interested in working on one of these than I'm working on the extension, you could absolutely work together with us and I could provide you some guidance. So one of the things is we can actually run ClearML with Docker Compose. So you could you could set up a Docker Compose maybe on your laptop or on an AWS EC2 instance and run and try to self-host ClearML, including a ClearML agent. So you could have an entire local instance of ClearML, all the components of it. And that could actually make a great local development environment. So that'd be very cool. And, it could also be good for unit tests if we wanted to get really advanced. For our extension, we could maybe spin up a temporary version of all of the ClearML stack in CI and then trigger the TypeScript parts of our code to invoke the ClearML session CLI against it. That might not be worth it, but it could be cool. Another one is I have started a AWS CDK project to host ClearML on AWS. You could potentially pick up where I left off and polish that up so that we have a infrastructure as code script that you can use to self-host ClearML on an EC2 instance in AWS. That could be a really good project if you are interested in learning about AWS and infrastructure as code and DevOps and all that stuff. Another one is getting the ClearML autoscaler to work. So I told you before that ClearML can create EC2 instances on demand and install the ClearML agent onto them. In the SaaS hosted version of ClearML, it's quite easy to do. And in the self-hosted one, maybe with CDK, it's slightly harder. You could try to get that set up, and then we could use our extension. From our extension, we could choose whether or not we want a session on an EC2 instance or on a laptop or on maybe something like a DigitalOcean droplet. And we could do all 3. And it would be cool to show that our extension works with any type of compute that the ClearML agents can run on, even all simultaneously, like one ClearML session deployed onto each type. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to show you is if you want to get a jump start on learning about some of these things, I think that would be very helpful because then you could hit the ground running when we get to Hack Night. So if you want to be talking with me online about ideas and getting ready, here are some things you can learn about. One is ClearML itself. ClearML has a fantastic onboarding playlist on YouTube. It's really high production quality. It's about 12 videos and they're all pretty short. It doesn't talk about the ClearML session CLI tool, but it doesn't necessarily need to. I think everything that I told you in this video is already a good bit of context on this, so this will just help you get familiar with the architecture and mission and workflow of ClearML. I think their series does a good job making you think about good MLOps practices in general. So in general, it's a very good educational resource. And you can watch most of it in under an hour. Okay, another thing is if you're fuzzy on TypeScript and you want to work on the VS Code side of things, then you should watch a learn TypeScript in one video sort of video. There's plenty of those online. You might need to start with a JavaScript video first because TypeScript builds on JavaScript and most TypeScript tutorials don't talk about the JavaScript basics. But like I said, GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT will get you productive with TypeScript very quickly. And it's similar enough to Python that if you know how to write Python code, you shouldn't have trouble picking it up. And then the last one is VS Code extensions themselves. The VS Code extensions have like a certain anatomy, they have lifecycle methods, and there's some frameworky things to learn about VS Code extensions. And a lot of it's boilerplate. You could follow the Your First Extension guide on the official VS Code docs, and if you do that, you'll see this screenshot right here. This is a templated, this is a boilerplate code generating wizard that VS Code has, and you can use this to generate a Hello World VS Code extension and quickly get running with it. So that's pretty nice. And you could also look at the code of the black VS Code extension, or the the remote SSH extension if you want to get a jump start on learning how we can start that connection to the remote instance. I've also got some code that I'll show you in a separate video. I'm going to make 2 videos going over a lot of the learnings that I've had about VS Code extensions. I've already started to learn about this stuff, and I've even learned how to interface from VS Code to Python. So I think if you watch this next video that I have for you, you'll come away with a really good idea of what sorts of things are actually important to learn to be able to get our project done. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video. I would love it if you would join me on this project. It's also totally fine if this is not interesting to you. I genuinely believe that this project will make the barrier to entry for data scientists using remote workstations significantly lower. Like I could actually imagine thousands of people using this VS Code extension. I think ClearML is a really cool project, and even if it isn't necessarily a fit for every MLOps team, I think it should be everybody's default choice because it does so much and it's self-hostable. And it's a more modern reaction to older MLOps tools like MLflow, or the open source version of MLflow, I should say. I think this is cool because this is a greenfield project. It involves a lot of DevOps type things, AWS, the cloud, digital infrastructure as code, and MLOps. And I think that if we build this, we can actually make an impact on the state of MLOps as an industry by promoting the use of remote workstations. Oh, and the reason why we want to use remote workstations, I should say this before we end the video, is basically remote workstations allow you to develop models or develop software on an environment that's as similar as your production environment as possible. So like if you're going to end up deploying your models on AWS EC2 instances, which many model serving offerings do that, it would be good if you developed your models on AWS EC2 instances to make sure that your libraries are compatible and that your code performs the way you want it to, and to encourage you to make code that is reproducible and make it easy to collaborate with people and have the advantage of amazing network speeds because the remote workstation is in an AWS data center instead of you having to download large amounts of data over your hotspot in a coffee shop. Anyway, so many good reasons to use remote workstations, both for data science and just software engineering in general. All right, thanks again for watching this. I will see you in the next video if you're interested, where I'll be covering the anatomy of a VS Code extension and some work that I've done to get started with this project.